Now you're all set.
Great. I realize we've got about 16, 17 people having joined us so far, and we expect more folks to trickle in. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 2021 meeting of Community Board One's Land Use, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee. I'm Chair of the committee, Patrick Cannell, joined by my little guy, Leo, here, along with Diana Sweets, our Director of Land Use and Planning, and is Laura Starr on, who's our co-chair? I think I see Laura there.
I'm here.
There you are.
Hi, everybody. Great to see everybody.
So we have what I think will be a relatively short agenda. We don't have any applications or voting items on for tonight, but we do have 2 items of discussion. So let's get started. First is a discussion about the future of the open restaurants program. And let me just tee this up quite quickly. In September, as folks may recall, we passed a resolution, CB1 passed a resolution with regard to the open restaurants citywide zoning text amendment. CB1 was opposed to the amendment, not necessarily opposed to the program in and of itself, but opposed to the text amendment because we had concerns about the timing. Why now? If the temporary program is slated to continue for several years, why are we being put in a position when there are so many unanswered questions to deal with it right now? And so we felt it was better that the city not go forward with the text amendment and then sort of go back to the drawing board. Since then, while they haven't dropped the zoning text amendment, my understanding is that the mayor's office is trying to solicit more robust feedback and engagement from folks in terms of what they do want to see, assuming that the program goes forward. So sort of the inverse of what we may have been looking at before. And the chair of our community board, Tammy Meltzer, has asked that I think almost all of the committees, it appears from the agendas, have a look at this and think about what it is that they want from their committee's perspective. So for example, this is on some level of discussion about open restaurants is on the Youth and Ed Committee agenda tomorrow, as well as the Transportation Committee agenda. It's on licensing and permits, waterfront parks and culture, and environmental protection, as well as the Executive Committee and quality of life, of course, which I think is probably one of the bigger committees to visit the issues this month. So with that, we've already dealt with many of the land use issues, and we thought, of course, in that context about some of the economic development impacts that is, of course, part of the remit of our committee. So I don't know that there's a great deal for us to discuss in the land use context at this point until we are able to hear from our sister committees in terms of what concerns other folks are seeing and what they want to see in the program. But with that, I'll shut up and sort of throw it open for discussions. This will be a discussion by the board members for now, and we'll recognize the board members first. So if you want to raise your hands, that's how I'll recognize people. Although, raise hand feature, am I just going to see a hand like sort of waving in the window? Diana, is that how it looks?
I hope so. This meeting, when this meeting was set up, it was configured a little differently. I believe it's a meeting and technically not an event, which is why all the participants are grouped together instead of panelists and attendees. I, as the host, can't raise my hand anyway.
Okay.
Patrick,
I don't see it on here. So you know what?
Okay.
We're a small enough group at this point. Why don't we just, I'm going to do it kind of in the Brady Bunch squares that I see, and I'll call on everybody and see if you have anything you want to add. Gerald, do you have anything?
Thanks, Patrick. Not at this time.
Okay. Pat Moore? I know it's going to your committee anyway later in the month, so.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, for us, you know, it's all going to be about noise and dirt and sanitation and all of those issues.
Pat. Laura?
I guess for me, it's about, you know, I'm thrilled that we're rethinking how the streets can be used, and I like the idea of supporting a more comprehensive view of it and really, you know, developing a broader policy about what is the highest and best use of this space that now we're saying doesn't have to be used just for parking or travel lane. So I guess I'm advocating for a bigger, broader picture.
Okay.
I think I was struck by the article by Lynn Ellsworth that Alice sent around about the kind of urban economics of the street, and kind of going by that.
Okay, cool. I do see a couple folks have figured out how to do the raised hand feature, but again, we're kind of a small enough a group, so if folks don't mind, I'm just going to keep going down the line. Luis, I see you next. Anything you want to add? Future voting instruments.
As you explained it, summarized it very well, I am completely in favor of what you described.
Okay. Paul Goldstein. Hello, Paul.
Hi, good evening. I'll pass at this point and perhaps have something to say later. Thank you.
Okay. Richard, Mr. Corman. How are you, my friend?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Patrick. First, I want to say I agree wholeheartedly with what Laura just said, that the idea of rethinking our use of the roadway is this is an amazing opportunity to do that. I don't remember exactly what we did. I don't have it in front of me, what we said in the resolution, and I wondered if it didn't take up too much time, if you could quickly summarize it. Is that asking too much?
No, I can do that easily. So I have it right up here. I'll just give you our therefore be it resolved. CB1 opposes the open restaurants citywide zoning text amendment due to the following reasons and urges that the plan does not move forward until these items are satisfied. This is bullet number 1. There are far too many unanswered questions and a desire for greater detail, not only on the zoning text amendment, but also on future design regulations and review procedures, including rationale for the timing of this proposed program. Second bullet. Additionally, there are unanswered questions and concerns as to the timing of this application and why community boards are being put in the position now to review and comment on this major proposal before the details of the plan have been decided. And the third and final bullet point, CB1 has technical concerns and questions regarding issues such as clearance and clear path requirements, obstructions, requirements for spaces to be level, driveways and curb cuts, etc.
Somebody's at my door. Sorry, so I've got to come back. If that's okay.
Go grab your food. All right, Alice, you were up next.
Okay, hi there, everybody. Welcome back, Diana. Yeah, just to be clear, Tammy and I did discuss this at length, and I think her idea, which I thought was an excellent one, was to try to put forth, because we've already put forth what was wrong or what we did not think was great about it, but so this next iteration is to assist when it's now going to be reviewed with more detail, what we'd like to see change, specifically. So in the land use domain, I think you really want to think about where the ownership of zoning questions goes. In other words, what's happening here, as we all know, is it's kind of moving out of the hands of the lowly folk like ourselves, or even the less lowly, like the Department of City Planning, and moving into Department of Transportation. And that opened up a really big can of worms. So I'm not sure exactly tonight whether I could come up with verbiage yet. I don't think any of us could, as to specifically what we want to see happen. But I think one of the things we don't want to see happen is kind of eviscerate our hard fought for zoning laws. And that the idea that this is a one size fits all application of zoning, it also makes no sense, because of course Tribeca is not Central Queens. So it's that sort of thing that I think we could work together on. I don't know if it's supposed to happen tonight, but I'm ill prepared if that's the case. But I think that's where we want to go with this, is to kind of identify things that we really should be looking at very carefully when we go forward with some version of this.
Thanks, Alice. So I think what I envision anyway, and I presume this is the intent here, is that we're going to gather comments and feedback like those great comments from Alice from the committees, and bring them together in the executive committee, and we'll talk about how to formalize the board's position, whether it's a chair letter or something like that going forward. But that would be my expectation anyway. I don't think we're going to get that accomplished here tonight. So thanks for that. My John Street neighbor, Vicki Cameron. See you next.
Thank you. I read a terrific article that CB2 wrote where they took a survey and something like 98% of the restaurants did not comply with the current guidelines. And I was very concerned about that. Knowing what I do, it's unfortunate when we give people room to interpret, it generally turns into chaos. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is I'm seeing now when restaurants go out of business, they just abandon their sidewalk shed. And I think that's a terrible thing. And DOT is probably not the right agency to enforce. I also find that the kind of visual chaos, our streets are now like some ghetto. I mean, everyone's doing what they want. So that bothers me. And I think in the long run, it is not going to serve well in Manhattan, especially lower Manhattan with smaller, narrower streets. Also, many of them are not complying on call 311. Big places like the Silverstein Tower on Church Street, opted to build out and maximize their footprint. And now their fancy restaurant has installed seating outside where they actually nailed or drilled into the public sidewalk their guardrails. And then around the corner, because it wasn't enough to take one side, they had to take the whole corner. And the corner has an ADA ramp. And I was standing there, there was a woman with a stroller, there were other people. No one could maneuver around this. And I just don't think it's fair that landowners who maximize their properties are now maximizing public sidewalks, and there is so little guidance and rules on how we, the public, can control what happens on public domain. And I'm extremely concerned that letting this go, we'll find ourselves in a few years with utter chaos. Unlike Rome, that I love and visit so much, everyone comes out, they put a couple of tables, chairs. We go out and we intuitively maximize. Everything has to be to its fullest greedy layout, and that leaves the streets uninhabitable for pedestrians, never mind people with wheelchairs or strollers. I'm very concerned that what the city is proposing will backfire, and in a few years we'll just have a mess that we'll have to backpedal, and anything that gets enacted is hard to take back. So that was my concern.
Thanks, Vicki. If I can summarize that into one or two bullet points about things we want to see improved, assuming it goes forward, and understanding your broader point that you think it's a bad idea to begin with and really creates too much chaos and isn't as beautiful as we might romanticize from European cities. In the zoning context, we would like to see improvement in enforcement mechanisms and funding, and we would like to see improvement in the wording in the zoning text amendment, specifically to deal with abandoned or ghost sheds when a restaurant leaves that space unattended.
And design regulations, sizes. I'm telling you, most of them are incapable of dealing with drainage. Drainage is something that is left to engineers who spend many, many years in practice. And then, as juniors, they're not put out to do drainage on streets. So it's a very highly specialized area. And right now, everyone is blocking city drainage. It's like we spent decades, if not, 100, 200 years making the city what we have in our modest means. And all of these structures are blocking drainage. So we're getting underneath rotting. We're getting animals, mosquitoes, animals from rats, birds, mosquitoes. The whole thing cannot be so easily handled as the DOT was presenting to us, because so many informed people have worked to make what we have. So the lack of regulations and lack of respect for previous decisions is very concerning in terms of design.
Okay, so I've got a note then that we want to see in the zoning text amendment improved design regulations. And let me ask you a question. If in proposing that, and maybe I'm making too much of an assumption, if there's a citywide design standard that works,
Right.
is there a group of professionals you can think of who should form that panel of folks who should come up with those regulations? Because I think that would be sort of a positive, helpful, constructive comment to add.
Yeah. Well, the city has a
Yes,
lot of
landscape
different
architect.
agencies. Roundtable architect, okay, or, you know, any of the agencies that we use thus far. You know, the rules that we've had in place so far and how we deal with streets and furniture on streets probably has some good starting points. So if Alice can come up, or who was that? I'm sorry, was that?
That was Laura.
Yeah, Laura, yeah. You know, we can start with what we have, and then if we have money, we can hire private entities who, as I said, design this stuff on a daily basis. Unfortunately, the less rules we have, the worse it's going to be in the long run, I promise. I see what's happening in my own job every day. Clarity and enforcement are the only ways to run these kinds of programs. It's not done out of unkindness. It's going to increase the budget for these places, but you know, they're increasing their income. Prices have skyrocketed. That's another thing I'm concerned, by the way. Restaurant prices have skyrocketed, and I'm worried that as a result, people will stop going out as much. I mean,
Right.
and so again, we're left with those vacant spots. Some of them are used even when the restaurants are in, and some of them are not used even when the restaurants are in use. So, and then the ones that just abandon it, I mean, it's just awful. And we have too small a streets to have that happen.
Okay.
And you get my point. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. So I know I was going down the line, and I don't want to miss anybody, but I think it is a little bit easier because I see some folks have figured out the raise hand feature, and now I've figured it out too. So let me coach everybody through that, and then we're going to switch gears, and rather than and maybe in an attempt to move us along, just call on those who have raised hands. So if you go to the reactions button, which is along the, if you're on a desktop, along the bottom, you have mute, stop video, share, and then there's something that looks like a happy face-ish thing that says reactions. If you click on that, at the very top, you can go raise hand like I just did there, and then lower hand, raise it, lower it, like that, okay? So, Pat, I see you, Pat Moore, I see you have figured that out. So I'll call on you next, and then Richard, hopefully, and Jason's figured out the reactions. Thanks, man. Richard, if you're back with us, I'll call on you second. That may still be up from before. And Gerald, I see you now as well. So, Pat.
I want to know what he's having for dinner. But anyway, you remember years ago when they decided that all of the newspaper stands had to be a particular design, and they made them all cohesive.
I do.
I don't understand in a way why we are not making these sidewalk restaurant sheds cohesive. Either, you know, a company designs them and you rent them, but we've got all of a mishmash of designs and materials and sizes, and some are, you know, fireproof and some are not. There should be something cohesive about these sidewalk sheds, and then they could, not sidewalk sheds, but restaurant additional seating, and then they could customize them inside if they wanted to. But I think the size and the materials and the outside should all be a cohesive unit.
Yeah, I propose a design commission for sidewalk sheds too.
Right, just to add one thing to Pat's comment. Hi, Pat. You see, also, again, this is not thought through, and when we spoke to them, they had very few answers. Problems should, I mean, one of the regulations is based on the square footage of your restaurant, therefore, how much can you expend? I mean, there are some restaurants on 7th Avenue that have literally tripled right? And again, it's not being unsympathetic. It's saying that our streets are ours, and we should be paid if you're going to triple or double. Maybe 10%, 20%, some number should be thrown out there so that if you are going to make the modular, then we should, that has to be based on a square footage. So you get an X or 2X and that's it. Pat, thank you. Great point.
Awesome. Richard and then Gerald and then Rosa.
Yeah, thanks for coming back, Patrick. I had my fresh direct delivery that I had to put away. But I was listening.
Better for Good.
So just kind of to elaborate where I was before, and this is probably not what they're asking us to comment on, but the idea of having a range of uses that is a whole option and opportunity to really rethink how we use our roadways as opposed to parking, and not just restaurants. I mean, we have made a decision that this is the only value add for the use of our road space, and I don't think that's the right answer. So yes, it should be there. Yes, we should have, it'd be great to have restaurants in there, but that's not the only thing that we should be using the roadway for. And the other thing that I would say about it, and this is, again, I haven't made any headway in terms of how we deal with this, but I think that ultimately this is a gift to the landlords, and a very select set of landlords, because eventually the landlords are going to raise the rents of the restaurants and take the value, I think, out of what they get from the streetscape. And which landlords? Well, the landlords that happen to have restaurants in their buildings. And then of course it's those restaurants that have corners. What a bonus to them, as opposed to restaurants that have only just a small sidewalk and therefore street space. So I think that there's such an element of unfairness here and narrowness that takes just a lot more thinking for us to get through, and unfortunately more thinking than I'm capable of putting into it. But those are my thoughts about this.
Thank you. I hope everyone will come out and support shared streets, right? Gerald, you were.
Maybe.
Yeah. Gerald, you're up next, and then Rosa.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for coming back to me too. You were looking for, I guess, solutions to the problem, and like others, I can go on about the problems as well, and including a wonderful visit by one of our neighborly rats over the weekend while we were sitting at one of these outdoor restaurants. But anyway, we all know the problem. So my concern is that these are buildings. I mean, I understand they're in a gray space, right? A gray area right now, kind of acting as outdoor cafes and kind of acting as structures and buildings. But these really are coming down to real estate. And I've witnessed a number, as the cold weather is starting to hit, I've witnessed a number of these sheds that have now been up for over a year, installing insulation and further enclosing their spaces. It certainly doesn't seem to keep with the CDC guidelines of having air circulation. So at that point, I'm wondering to what extent, these sidewalk sheds are really benefiting anybody except for the landlords. I'm in full support of the restaurants. We frequent them very often, and are friends with many of the restaurant owners. But again, seems to be a real estate issue. And as far as the sheds go, just your standard building practice. I mean, we certainly wouldn't let an 82-story tower go up with DOT reviewing it. Why are we doing this for a shed that is now getting air conditioning, heating, insulation, you know, and sits in a street with vehicles careening by. So as what I would put forward as proposals are that the design process must begin with zoning. I mean, it is a zoning issue until some other agency, Department of Planning, whomever, comes up with a cityscape, you know, a citywide understanding of how the streetscape should be used. It needs to start with zoning. The structure should go through DOB review like any other built structure with, you know, the health, safety, and welfare of the public involved. And finally, if DOT wants to review that, just like they do with, again, with other projects that overlap in their jurisdiction, they can do that. And finally, as far as the enforcement's concerned, you know, I think that gets, again, it's a double-edged sword here, but we have DOB that needs to be enforcing the structures themselves for proper codes and construction, and then we need to have DOT enforcing the setbacks and the right-of-ways and that sort. And then I think also the Department of Health still needs to be overseeing what's taking place in the cleanliness of these things. I mean, we get these cleanliness ratings, and then suddenly we have, you know, all sorts of stuff happening in the gutter, literally. So I mean, that's what I propose. I just like Vicky and others have said, I've witnessed open restaurants that have now moved back inside full time, abandoned their street sheds. They're still sitting there. They're just empty now and taking up space. It's street clutter, let alone, you know, it's just fire hazards and all the rest of it. And then there are, again, there's other situations where restaurants vacate. They have a street shed out front now, and the owners, the landlords are certainly going to be able to rent that at a higher square footage for as an existing restaurant, existing street shed, just like a restaurant that would have an existing kitchen in it. So that's my opinion with that. There was one other thought I had, which was, I guess, has to do with, well, I don't remember. I didn't write that one down. So that's all I'll say for now. Thanks so much, Patrick.
All right.
Great.
Thanks,
Can I
Gerald.
just add- I'm sorry, Patrick, can I
Sure.
just add to Gerald's comment? So, like I said, like we're all saying, so there's a long history of zoning, right? And we should pay attention to it because it all came through hardship. So for example, when you're maxed out on your zoning floor area, which is what most of these restaurants are, so we're expanding into public area, there are very clear rules that we have now on what constitutes a temporary structure versus a permanent structure. And one of the permanent structures is always air conditioning, heating and cooling. So if the structure gets heated and cooled, that immediately gets transferred to a permanent structure. And that has a whole other set of rules that one has to follow. It is there for a very good reason. So if it starts, see, that's what I mean. It starts with a temporary structure, and then unbeknownst to people, because they don't know zoning, they start adding things that are no longer a temporary structure. You can't just take that down. Plus, if you are going into that, you're expanding our zoning floor area. Our city is already congested to the bone. The other thing is that if you do have heating and cooling, that requires a lot of equipment. Where is that equipment? Is it safe? Oh, you know, yada, 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 the whole 9 yards. So Gerald was correct when he said, you know, now we're expanding from temporary to permanent, and we have a very long history on how that is handled.
Yeah, and Patrick, I just want to add, I remember the other issue, which was equity, which is the second item on tonight's agenda.
Right.
And, you know, again, I think I brought this up previously, but there are a number of restaurant owners in the area who, for whatever reason, are just simply unable to put out a sidewalk shed. I'm thinking in particular a restaurant owner who I think he and family members own two or three restaurants along a one-way street that has one side parking, and they don't have parking. Now, the other side, there's two businesses there. They have parking, so they're able to put out a sidewalk shed, but his businesses are unable to do that. Why should he suffer? I mean, as I was talking to him, he said, I must just be unlucky. It seems to me that in New York City, it's not a matter of luck. So one other example I want to point out is there's a situation on Rector Street and Washington where an establishment was given their indoor space can seat 62 people. There was a scaffolding that was built outside. There is a public plaza. I've already brought this up to elsewhere, but there is a public POPs. They've moved into the POPs. They've installed ceiling fans on the scaffolding, underneath the scaffolding. They've now installed heat lamps, propane lamps under the scaffolding at the base of a residential building. They also have a street shed that extends past their frontage. They went from 62 people inside to, I counted all the tables and seating, to 250 outside, or rather, excuse me, fully, with only two bathrooms, two small bathrooms, serving
Charles, I
beer.
don't want to cut you off, but I want to focus us because I don't, we could go on all night about, individual examples and a lot of different places that.
Right. So Patrick, I just want to say this is
public spaces, but I want to focus the conversation again on, what do we want to see in terms of the open restaurants program, and specifically from a zoning perspective, what do we want to have added to the zoning text amendment?
we need to have a clear path to enforcement.
Okay.
And that is something that should be written into the zoning, I believe.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to go to Rosa and Laura. I see you have your hand up. And then I believe we have a member of the public as well with a hand up. But I want to.
Patrick, I've had my hand up a long time. I don't know whether it's on, whether you see.
It's not, Joe, but I will absolutely recognize you. Okay. So let me go.
Yeah,
let me go.
before I go to sleep, I would appreciate it.
All right. Let's go, Rosa, and then I hope folks don't mind, but I'm going to take a little bit of prerogative and go to Joe after that. So Rosa, go ahead. And again, folks, we're not trying to retread the zoning text amendment and what we went over in September. I know there are strong feelings on both sides of whether the program's good or bad. Our remit tonight is really to think about what it is that we want to see in improvements if in fact the city is genuinely trying to listen to us. So focusing on the improvements and how we can make this stronger. Rosa?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So just want to say ditto on everything that Laura and Richard said. And I also really appreciated the Lynn Ellsworth op-ed. I think it was incredibly relevant. One thing I would like to see is safe and clear passage and minimum dimensions for space between the sidewalk sheds and a maximum length of obstruction for the sidewalk sheds so that people are able to cross around them and not feel like they can't see the street and any vehicles and or bicycles that are coming towards them. I'd like to see sufficient space and delineation between public space and private usage so it doesn't feel like I'm trespassing on restaurant territory when I'm just walking on the sidewalk. And I remember that they had, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I remember them having a minimum sidewalk width distance. Is that correct? I don't know. Diana, do you remember if there's a minimum? Yeah. Okay.
Just where you were, but there was a bit amendment. I think in the smallest areas, it might have been between 4 and 6, maybe 4.
It's in licensing. If the use in terms of the SLA, and then when people apply for outdoor cafes, there's a specific amount of space for egress and passage and all that. They should just use a lot of stuff that we use in licensing in terms of determining whether people can be approved for this. But
okay, thank you, Francis.
Thanks, Francis.
Yeah, that's helpful because I do feel like a lot of times, especially because they're obviously crossing between their commercial space to the shed, that there's a lot of back and forth, and so it really impacts the sense of the privatization, the feel of the privatization of the sidewalk. And there has to be sufficient space for people to walk around and to wheel around as necessary. Something that was touched on before, which is that the entire purpose of these sheds even being allowed during the time of coronavirus is to provide a safe space with adequate ventilation. And I think a lot of people who built these sheds didn't understand what that meant, because a lot of them just don't have proper ventilation. So if we could insist on that and put that in the text, that would be great, and define exactly what that means and how to achieve the ventilation. You'd also touched on who would be able to speak to this, and I think the Design Trust might actually be a good place to hit to see if they want to do a study on this for the city. And then in terms of the concern about the privatization of what is essentially public land, and then the developers getting all of the money rather than the city getting the money, I think it would be interesting to set it up as a temporary permit kind of system, where there is no guarantee. The permit doesn't travel with the space, it travels with the applicant, who is the restaurant owner. And the city can then sort of, you know, modify the price of of this like annual fee or whatever, depending on whether or not the like, I mean, obviously during the time of coronavirus, this was, you know, put in place so that restaurants could survive, right? So, and we don't want them to go down. They're an essential part of our city experience and our neighborhoods.
Right.
So we want to be able to help them in these kind of situations. But hopefully, you know, with the vaccines, we're not going to be here for too much longer. And so if this is something that becomes more permanent in nature and becomes a huge moneymaker, then yes, we would rather the city and the public, who actually owns the land, benefit financially from that, rather than necessarily a random
So that is
owner.
so that is that is, you know, just personally, in my view, that's an excellent idea. And that's the kind of thing, like, that's where this text amendment really can be improved. And I think that bothers a lot of people. And I've heard that comment a number of times already tonight about how much value the landlords get out of being able to more or less market that additional space. But if what you're saying becomes the way that the program works, it travels only with the particular restaurant, it's not guaranteed. So there is no value
Yeah,
necessarily to the landlord. It negates
yeah,
that issue. Maybe not
right. Because
necessarily
the
because, I
landlord
don't know.
can't promise that they're going to
Yeah,
actually be
yeah.
permitted with that
That's
space.
that's a
And
significant
this,
improvement. I would agree.
oh, thank you, Patrick. And then I just briefly, totally unrelated, want to shout out to Sergeant Wingert and say, hi, Sergeant Wingert, nice to see you here. And we look forward to seeing you and discussing our Manhattan Brooklyn Bridge project. I think that's it for me.
Welcome, Sergeant Wingert. So I'm going to go to Joe, and then Laura, and then Carrie Parker Davidson has her hand up, and then we're going to end discussion on this and move on to our next item. Mr. Lerner.
Just for clarification purposes, I thought this is a program to help the restaurants during this problem we have with the virus. Is there anything saying there's a limitation to this? Are we giving the property away to these city property away for 2 years if we just vote on this resolution?
Well, to clarify, that it's a permanent program. That's what the text amendment proposes. We don't have a resolution tonight. We voted on a resolution 2 months ago in disfavor of making the program permanent because there are so many open questions. So what we're back to do tonight, Joe, is really just to sort of take the next step and presume for the moment, which is a big presumption, that the city agrees and says, oh, okay, yeah, not a great program. How can we make it better?
Well, I would like to make sure that we put our previous resolution saying we're not in favor of this forever when you do this resolution as well.
Okay, I will mention that to the executive committee. I think that's
I-
more or
I
less what our
think-
resolution says, but I hear your point.
I think stuff of most importance, whether they stay forever or just until the virus is over with, is lost in all the complications of zoning. And
Okay.
I don't want that to be lost.
All right, maybe what I'm hearing, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, and we could bring this to the executive committee, is that we question whether the program needs to be made permanent, and maybe there's I don't know, I'll throw out a number, 5 years sort of.
No 5 years.
Okay, no, all right, not permanent then. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it should be in every resolution we do about this. We're not going to get, in my opinion, I'm not going to give away city streets and city property to landlords just because.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. All right, Laura, and then Carrie Parker Davidson.
This is quick. I actually love the anarchy and the vibrancy of the restaurants, and I would just, like to find a way to have it work so that we still have our quality of life and it's a level playing field, and that it's good for the city as a whole. And so that's really where, like, I don't, New York is all about the entrepreneurial and creative spirit, and I love the way it's blossomed on our streets. And I just think now that the streets have been opened up, like I said before, they need to be opened for all sorts of uses, maybe not just the restaurants. And I agree with Rosa that the money from the value added from them should redound to the city, not into the landlord's pockets if possible. I'm not a zoning expert, even though I'm a landscape architect. So I'm just speaking holistically from a kind of landscape architectural perspective. That's it.
Patrick, I'm
Thanks, Laura.
sorry. It's Alice. I have my hand raised, but I don't think you can see it. I'm sorry, Carrie, I'm jumping in ahead of you just to say that one of the things, we worked really hard for many years and what was called, as you recall, the Tribeca Committee, in trying to be very careful about where sidewalk cafes went and didn't go, and particularly closed sidewalk cafes, which I fear these structures are becoming more and more resembling. So I would really like to put into the land use packet a consideration of very specifically where our sidewalk cafes are, why they're there, and if we're opening up every side street to the ability to have sidewalk cafes, we really open up a tremendous can of worms. And I think all the work that we've done for all the years prior needs to be reviewed prior to making the idea that, okay, all bets are off. Every side street now can have absolutely any number of sidewalk cafes with all of the issues that'll probably be reviewed in quality of life by Pat. So I think that's one thing I would ask, that as a group, as Community Board 1, we look at that, and particularly with enclosed cafes. Ironically, there are only 2, if I'm not mistaken, in our community board, for good reason, perhaps. And so what we're proposing here is potentially an infinite number, not technically enclosed, but very similar. So I just think we need to be drilled down and be a little bit in the weeds as to where these things are and where we really want them to go. And so that, I think that does fall into the purview of this committee. So that's it. And I'm happy to do a little homework on that.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, if you got something that we can sort of include as a bullet point, that would be helpful. Carrie, you are next and last, and then we'll move on to our next item. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I think I am. Yes, thank you.
Hi.
So my initial comment was from a zoning and land use context, whether or not allowing these sheds is the same as unmapping the streets. Do the streets become, are we privatizing in the legal sense also, in that the restaurants and landlords have sort of property rights? And how do
The short answer is no.
Okay, so then I think Rose's suggestion is a good one. What I'm concerned about as a member of the public is just the privatization of city streets and not being able to get them back should we need them at a later time. So some sort of master plan for revisiting how we're maximizing public benefit. Right now, we've decided that the maximization of public benefit was to support the economy and the restaurants. But what if maximizing public benefit looks different, next year? So is there some sort of rubric or scale that the city or zoning or whomever is the right group, some sort of rubric that we can use to determine citywide, neighborhood-wide, or even block by block, what features would maximize public benefit? In some blocks, it might be additional bicycles. In other blocks, it might be, restaurant seating. And in others, it's a big project, but I think we might do well to think of these things in a more hyper-local way. And maximize public benefit being sort of the general.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good point. And if I can encapsulate that to sort of a bullet point to bring to the executive committee, we need some way to amend or even potentially revoke the program either as a whole, but certainly when it comes to individual neighborhoods, block by block, et cetera, so that we can make sure that the highest and best use of that space if things change in the future.
Could I just add
Yes,
on to
thank
that
you.
super quick? I think Carrie brought up a really good point, which is that we sort of almost have to treat it like as if it's a limited common element in a condo, because it remains public land. And if at any point the city or anybody like a utility company, whoever needs to go in and access that space, then access to that space needs to be revoked, right? And so these sort of components need to be things that can be easily, taken apart, removed, and that space be given back to public use in an emergency situation or for maintenance situations of public land.
Right. Okay. Good. Got it. All right, everybody. Thanks. This has been helpful. I will bring these comments back to the executive committee, and we'll keep the conversation moving from there. With that, I want to move on to our second item. It's something that each of the committees also are being asked as a policy matter to consider. We're looking at questions about inclusion and equity for each of the committees and the work that we do, and really how do we expand our thinking to make sure that we are being more equitable and inclusive in the decisions and the asks. And for land use, it's really thinking about how are those projects that we're being asked to review, are they inclusive, are they equitable for the community, and are we looking at it with eyes wide open, or do we have some blind spots that we need to address? I was talking about this earlier with Diana, and I'm happy to hear a few folks' thoughts. I'm sure we all have a bunch of varied views and ideas, but I think what I would propose and will propose to the community board leadership is something more of a task force within the community board that can help come up with some ideas and guidelines and thoughts that each of the committees should then sort of consider, and they might even get the help of like a diversity and inclusion expert who can help them really guide those conversations. I'll confess I'm not equipped certainly to do that, and I don't want anything to be lost in the discussion because I lack the ability necessarily to really do that. I think there are those who have those specialties and abilities and could make us far more impactful if we're able to listen to them rather than the conversation being dictated necessarily from us. That is not to say I don't want to hear everyone's thoughts tonight, but so I'm just sort of throwing that out there, that I think that's one way we can sort of carry this mandate of ours forward. And if everyone is sort of on board with that, or if no one really objects to that, that's what I would propose to the executive committee. So with that, we're talking about those issues, and if folks want to comment in, more than happy to hear it. I see Laura has her hand up, and Richard Corman still has his hand up. I'm not sure if that's from the earlier discussion, but If
Sorry, I'll
if
take it
it's not-
down. It was from the earlier one. I don't
Okay.
have my hand up, but I liked your idea.
Great. Anybody else?
Me too.
Got it. Anybody else want to be heard on this? Okay, seeing no hands, great. It's a very important subject. I'm not giving it short shrift. It's something I think we're going to have, sort of think of it as a living project that we're going to get used to tackling over the next several months and years and beyond. So this is really just a conversation starter. So with that, we have nothing else on our agenda. You guys, we get to get out of here early. I think we're in record time, certainly for 2021 for the Land Use and Zoning Committee. Folks, thank you so much. We've all worked really hard this year. We've had a record number of applications as this administration has drawn to a close. A lot of stuff is getting pushed through toward the end of the de Blasio administration. We know that. And I think we all deserve a little bit of a break and getting out of here early. But I really do want to thank everybody for all your hard work this year. All right.
Thank you, Patrick.
Adjourned.
Great
Thank you,
leadership.
guys.
Patrick.
Thank you,
See you,
Patrick.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks,
Good night,
Patrick.
everyone.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.